So, where were we? Hi again. I'm Stone Hobbit from Roughshod Ramblings, and my special guest today is James Bartley. And as we've already been chatting, so we're just going to get straight back into it. We'll get into an introduction shortly, but I'm just loving this vibe. Okay, so we were talking about Buffy the Vampire Slayer, but how the scenes, it's exactly that right now. It's a sacrifice, major sacrifice, big lush feeding. The other thing that I'm seeing that keeps coming up is these, you remember the cathedrals where all the skeletons were stacked, and in Paris, and the Marquet caves and tunnels. I'm sort of leaning towards, we're getting into, is if we don't if everybody doesn't wake up in a bloody hurry, we're gonna have that again. We're gonna have that again. There's like this whole AI concept, the whole the whatever's going on down here is gonna, I sort of see it as it's a setup to provoke something else to come in, because the rings have now been set up around the planet, and then you've got the bullshit space wars between Elon Musk and Trump. That's all staged performance. They've done the buddy buddy thing on stage, made them look like they're good mates and all of this. Now there's got to be some sort of division that's going to kick in, so that's another two sides they're developing. Which side are you going to be on? The AI side, or you're going to be on the Trump side? Oh man, it is so, it's so playing out. It's so playing out. So I'm sorry. What were you? You. This is because of you. See, you just jogged the brain.
Oh, well, the reason why Stone Hobbit brought up Buffy the Vampire Slayer was because we got into a discussion before recording about these episodes in the Buffy the Vampire series. And one of them involved this omnipotent ancient vampire who was in an underground cavern system held in check by a magical force field. And the only way he could break out was that it was some kind of prophecy where after X number of centuries
Yeah.
on a particular date, all of his vampire underlings and acolytes on the surface had to slay as many people as possible in this time window.
Yeah.
And by doing so, it weakened the magical force field and allowed this master vampire to get out and come to the surface and basically take over. Of course, Buffy and the crew thwarted that effort. And then in another episode, I think it was um, maybe the end of season 2 or 3, I can't remember, but uh, it was called Graduation Day. It was a two
Yeah.
part series. And the mayor of Sunnydale, I think that was the town. And it's interesting because in the story, there was a huge hellmouth, an interdimensional vortex beneath Sunnydale, which explained a lot of the phenomena that happened at that place. And then also, if you watch that show on the spin-off of Angel, there's also a large uh, hellmouth vortex beneath Los Angeles. Surprise, surprise. But anyway, in the Graduation Day series, this mayor, right? No, it's not Karen Bass, but it was another mayor. And it was like an omnipotent demon in the guise of a human mayor. And he had all these underlings that were vampires. And the episode was called Graduation Day because the mayor, once again, acting out a prophecy,
Yeah.
was going to conduct what he called ascension, where his underling vampires had once again to slay as many people on the surface as a loosh fest in
Yeah.
order to allow him to shapeshift into a gigantic demon, right? And once again, Buffy and the crew thwarted that. But the point of relevance is that what I'm seeing and what you're seeing, we just talked about this, it's something similar.
Oh yeah.
It's all this chaos that's erupting on the surface, and we're going to see a lot more of it. before the dust settles. The veils are very thin. CERN and other
Yeah.
technology is cranked up. We're having more and more cryptid sightings, more and more dogmen, more and more Sasquatch, more and more other critters, right? Because the membrane between worlds, dimensions, they're so porous now.
Yeah.
Entities are coming and going, and when they crank up the 5G, that'll enable even more entities to come in, take up more people as hosts, and with all the special ingredients in these treatments they've rolled out in the recent past, that's going to plug people right into this Borg collective, whether they're living or dead, in my view. So all this that's going on the surface is leading us to this point. Can be averted. I'm an optimist, right? I'm hoping
Yeah.
it can be averted.
Yeah.
But if it's not averted, it's going to be hell on earth with
I
all
think
these.
I think that's why we're here. I listened to one of your talks a little while ago, and it was a conversation about reptilians. And the first thing I got was, because I got the same, what you were saying was, I got the same message, but it was the fallen angels. All right. And they, the war that was going on in heaven at the time, and this is just stuff that's come to me over the years through the crazy visitations that I get, was basically the same as what we've got going on here right now with the creation of the AI, the synthetic AI that's going to walk around amongst us. It's already doing it. And so there was those that were for it and those that were against it. And this was what, then there was this big bloody war against it. And now some of the good got left behind. And at this point in time, I'm not really into the whole angel scene of it all, but the idea behind it, I do believe that we lived in a time where we all lived together. All these different species, all these different creatures with all these different abilities. And the reasons we have all of these abilities is because these were communication ports. These were like our senses are ways we communicated with these other beings. It's the way that I communicate with the beings when they come in now. So why would it be any different somewhere else? And when we talk about the veils thinning, 100% behind you on that one, because it's like, when the orbs first started coming in, and then they came in mass, it was like I got to see a form of hijacking that was going on. It was like the energy from the orbs was also being drained by another entity that came in via them. Excuse me. And so I got to see different types of creatures using different types of energy. And the more they came, the more they came in, the more they were also infiltrated so that more could come in. And now, like, the veil is so thin that it's almost like a flow of these beings come in. I mean, CERN's got more than one friggin', generator going on there. These generators are all over this planet. There's so many things that are going on to destabilize this planet, to just, disrupt everything. Displacement is happening full on. I was sitting here the other day having a conversation about the four horsemen. We're in it right now. We're in all of the stages at the same time right now, because they're possibly going to lose this time round, because we are waking up to the levels that we are waking up to. We can see who's doing what, causing what. It's not going to be long before everybody goes, well, we can preempt what's going to go next. And then when it shows up for them, they're going to go, come on, we're all seeing it. How long do we have to keep repeating these things before we can stop it from going to the next levels? I truly believe that this is going to provoke, it's going to send a message out there for them to come in. And when they come in a mass, because I've seen the wars that you've talked about, I've seen them above the house, shooting back and forth. And it used to be they worked together, but now they don't. You know, it's like, no, this is my end and this is your end and nothing else can pass through here. There's some really crazy stuff that I'm seeing out here. So, yeah, with uh, with the reptilians and stuff, I'm going to jump over to something that came up just recently. The Palantir. I was on a weird journey and I got that name. So I wrote it down. I didn't know what it meant. I hadn't heard it, blah, blah, blah. And then so I looked it up, and then all of a sudden there was all this stuff about the spy technology, the satellites, and then there was the Eye of Sauron, and then it went into crystal ball gazing, and it was used as a two-way port. Now I get those orange plasma luminous ships come in. And a couple of occasions during the daytime, I've seen what looks like a big bubble float across the top of the roof, but it could stop and it could move in different directions. So I knew it wasn't a bubble. So when we can see it and they can see us, wherever they're connected to can see them as well, can see everything that they can see. So, it's only going to be a matter of time before they start using that technology right in front of us to portal in and portal out, you know.
I agree.
A-
A lot of the talk is rightly so about the mass illegal immigration. It's all deliberate, of course, to create chaos and destroy the white race and European ethnic heritage and history, et cetera, et cetera. We know that. But there is also another large illegal invasion, if you want to call it that, and that's all these entities coming in.
yeah,
It's not only coming in through portals, but spaceships. I mean, all across the board, more and more entities are coming here because we're reaching the end of that cycle again. This planet has been subjected to cyclical, celestially driven cataclysms. I keep banging on about this over and over. People are starting to see more often because, for whatever reason, maybe they're lax about chemtrailing as much as they should in some places.
yeah,
But more and more people are seeing the second sun, Nemesis, Nibiru,
yeah,
the brown dwarf, call it what one will. It's there. It's extremely large, and it has its own, what amounts to its own solar system. And the possibility exists that it's inhabited with one or more uh, advanced races, species.
yeah,
This may very well be the Anunnaki that has been written about in the cuneiform tablets, which I refer to as the Anunnaki Chronicles.
yeah,
And we may be at that point when that system intersects with ours again.
yeah,
And we're already seeing a manifold increase in radical earth changes,
yeah.
dozens and dozens of volcanoes all over the world
Mm,
uh, erupting. They just talked last week about uh, under the ocean off of Oregon in the northwest of
yeah.
America. There apparently is an underwater volcano with a
Okay.
caldera that's a mile wide
Yeah.
with a gigantic amount of magma underneath. So we're seeing volcanic and seismic activity going through the roof. And people have to understand when people talk about a pole shift, that doesn't necessarily mean a complete 180 or 360 rotation.
Yeah.
Get a bowl of water, just
Yeah.
move it over just a fraction of an inch, and just see the displacement and the water sloshing around. If our planet shifted 1 or 2 degrees, that's all it would take for just eruptions and volcanic seismic activity, tsunamis, uh,
Yeah.
tremendous super hurricanes, you name it. That's what will happen. and it won't take much, just a slight
No.
shift, 2-3 degrees on its axis. That's all it'll take.
I sort of see that that's happening now. I can see that all the floods and the land, the mudslides and all of this is all generated. This is by design. In the time that we've been here, we've never seen anything quite like it. We've seen the odd one or two and stuff like that, but now we're seeing it everywhere in all the countries. There is a shift that is going on, whether it's just what they're using or, also natural current events that go on. I'm wondering, the celestial bodies that are coming in, are they putting pressure on the fields around us, therefore putting pressure on us as the globe, if you want to call it that? And this is what's generating these earthquakes. And I know inside myself that all of this generation is man-made. Well, or not 100%. Some of it's the bad guys too. Um, but the tsunamis they're going to come. The tsunamis are coming. They planted the bombs with through Anadarko and all of that back then when they were doing the same protesting that they're doing now. The protests and stuff was covering up something that they were doing, like the missing missiles that went. Where did they go? No, that was swept under the carpet. But I believe that these were planted around coastlines to generate tsunami bombs. And I really do feel like we're getting close to actually seeing that take place. I've seen a couple of underground sinkholes, undersea sinkholes opening up. So that's been in some of the visions that I've had. So it's like I'm just waiting. I'm just waiting to see that. I've watched the earthquakes go from 3 pointers, and I keep seeing when we hit an 8.9, we're going to see liquefaction. We're going to see liquefaction. We're going to see buildings starting to sink into the ground. We're going to see the mud floods come. If you can imagine, you get the liquefaction, a building starts to sink in the ground, and then you get a slide, and it just totally covers it over. Boom, everything's gone. 100 years later, you build on top of it again. You'd have no idea that there's what happened. It's a repeated process. I'm seeing it everywhere. When I look at the map of the world, when they go to show the weather, it's like I'm looking at the landscape. I'm constantly doing, graphics in my head. Where's safe? Where's not safe? But it's happening everywhere. It's happening absolutely everywhere. So I'm wondering, do you think the celestials that are coming in is causing, or or is it coming from inside out? Because you've got areas of this planet that's cracking. You've seen the big cracks going across Africa and places like that. Oh, it's
I believe that some of it, significant part of it, is a natural
process.
process
Yeah,
as a result of this extra large um, planetary system in our solar system. I saw uh, a video taken from the Soho, this solar uh, observatory, and the sun reacted violently to the presence of the Nibiru Nemesis system, and it blew out a huge solar flare,
yeah,
and it momentarily illuminated Nemesis, Nibiru, call it what one will, and it's huge. And
yeah,
it also illuminated some of the uh, planets and moons that make up part of its system. Point being is we're fortunate at the time that we were not directly behind that system, because if we'd been in the line of fire,
yeah,
that's what Ed Dames and his team and others have talked about, the kill shot,
yeah,
right? Where
yeah,
this mega CM coronal mass ejection and or a solar flare shoots in our direction as a result of the interaction between uh, the brown dwarf and the sun. And since we're behind the brown sun in that hypothetical example, we're in the line of fire, and
Yeah.
we get hammered. And if you ever watch that Maze Runner show, I think it was on Netflix.
Yeah, I think I have heard of that.
Well, it's a short synopsis. It's about these kids, for the most part, they're late teens, early 20s. They're on the run. It's an apocalyptic scenario. The surface was scorched by a kill shot
Yeah.
from a solar flare, and it unleashed all these pathogens and diseases and what have you. And then the elite, they're trying to track down these kids because these kids seem resistant to all
Mm.
these diseases. So there's something about their genetic makeup or something which is drawing the interest of the elite. So what they want to do is capture them and make serums out of. Is that interesting? Make serums out of their blood work, basically, in order to prolong the lives of the elite. It's kind of like an adrenochrome thing
Yeah.
when you
Yeah.
think about it, right? So, but point of relevance is that whole scenario, as depicted in that TV show, came about as a result of a solar flare.
Yeah.
So, I think that that's something that we have to consider. Also, if we look at the passage of extra large planet sized comets, Planet X type comets, not just Planet X system, but
Yeah.
but comets that periodically come and go in our solar system, as well as the large debris field that's trailing this Nemesis Nibiru system, because we've
Yeah.
seen a radical increase the last 20 years of bolides, meteorites, what have you. And I think we're going to see more as time goes on. I mean, think of the Colburn Bible. Think
Yeah.
about Mother Mary Shipton, some of her prophecies,
Yes, absolutely.
and the case that Jorge Martin, the great investigator out of Puerto Rico, he spoke to a guy that was picked up by aliens, and they told him basically at some point a huge asteroid is going to hit in the Caribbean, and
Yeah.
it's going to create a global flooding event. And I've had dreams of tsunamis,
Yeah.
dreams of mass inundations, as has many others. So that's an aspect of our oversoul super consciousness tapping into, possible outcomes, possible future timelines.
Yeah.
So let's see how it plays out. But I think that the reason the reptilian overlords working through their hybrid plantation managers like George Soros, like all of those scumbags, why they're pulling out all the stops now is because they know we're up against a celestially driven cataclysmic timetable. They have
Yeah.
to get everything done, eliminate as much of the surface population as possible. From their standpoint, from their alien standpoint, they want to irradiate the Earth, make it uninhabitable for us. However, many of us that are still around that haven't
Yeah.
succumbed to all these treatments and all the wars and all the chaos. And
Yeah.
then, with the global dimming being what it is, for a lot of entities that come from twilight type worlds or subterranean cavern systems, when you have the level of global dimming, as it's
Yeah.
called, that we have right now, that
Yeah.
will enable beings that are not used to bright sunlight.
Yeah.
It'll enable them to come up to the surface and spend more time here. So that's another thing that we have to take into account. I mean, it's all coming to a head.
People are capturing things all the time now on night security cameras. I got put into a situation where I ended up having to get these night vision security cameras, and the images and things that I'm capturing on it is like, wow, what was that? What was that? That's not normal. Seeing fireballs going across the sky and then seeing what mimics itself to be a set of satellites going over the roof of the house. It's like that there's more to it than meets the eye. When you're out there, it's a beautiful blue day, and then all of a sudden you turn around and there's a mist rolling in. Yeah, where is that?
We had that not too long ago with all the mystery mist. If that's bad English, but people have to look at it from a historical context. John Keel and others have talked about how decades and even centuries ago, people reported these mysterious mist and fog that came in that wound up sickening and killing a lot of people.
Yeah,
And it was very localized in some of these stories from the past, where certain villages, towns, cities were covered over by this mist, and all this sickness and death ensues. Right?
yeah,
It's almost like a Passover kind of thing when you think
yeah,
about it. Right?
exactly. Yeah. I recently saw somebody putting markings on their door, and I thought, that's the first thing that came across was, first of all, there was the lambs and then the lamb's blood, and then there was the markings on the door, and I'm thinking, I know this. Where do I know this from?
Yeah.
You know?
They might as well paint their houses blue while they're at it.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. Oh wow. Okay, okay. I have a huge list of things that I want to get into, but I'm loving this. Okay, so do you think that another there's another epidemic coming? Okay. I can see that. It's
Yeah,
around us.
they're pushing hard for that. I mean, everyone's just kind of rolling their eyes, or at least those that
Yeah.
see through all this. But what with the WHO, World Health Organization, pandemic treaty, and all these protocols they've set up, yes, I can see them, if they so choose, to pull
If
that rabbit out of the hat again.
I'm hoping people would have woken up. I'm still bumping into people that are fully boosted, up to date. You know,
Wearing mask.
the ads are going around again, so it's like, yeah, it's getting close. I think there's still a handful of people out there that just don't get it yet. Okay, now I wanted to say to you, I wanted to ask you, because this when you have these experiences with these entities, and you go through the stages of, oh geez, okay, shock, surprise, anger, fear, you get past all of that, and then you get into the forms of communication with it. Now, I'm now sitting in a position where I'm looking back at some of these encounters I had in the early days. My whole mindset, where it was at, I'm looking through a mirror of sorts, and reliving it and seeing what's not right in it, why I didn't see it then. Am I picking up more information? And I did. I've been doing it with all the different beings I've encountered. And it's like, okay, for years I was analyzing the experience of them coming in and showing me all these different, they could shape shift. They could, they showed me they could morph into one, morph into two. They could take on human skin and all of this. And the thing that got me was I ran out of the room because that was my fear state. Because the face that they used was familiar to me, and straight away I thought that it might have been the spirit of my friend who was out jogging. I thought the worst. So that's what pulled me out of it. But on hindsight, I've gone over the ideas that, okay, did they use deceptive means to communicate with me? Or was it that they were just using that face as a familiar face that I would possibly relate to better and communicate with? And I've had these thoughts going on, always constantly analyzing every part of the experiences. you know I call it alien, ET PTSD. Once you've had an experience, that's it. It's over. You're always going to go there. Um, and so now where I'm looking at it is like I'm seeing so much more in the experience that I had, the exchange There was a telepathy exchange going on. I knew there was, but I didn't know the context of the conversation. And now it's not so much words or and thoughts and stuff, it's feeling states. It's feeling states. So if I ask a question and suddenly I'll go into, oh, there's a feeling state, I can relate that feeling state to the question I just asked. So I'm seeing that through that first experience that I had with these beings, and I'm doing this work that I'm doing, I'm still in communication with these beings. So as you know, that's I wanted to know with you, with the ones that you had earlier on, childhood, because I could go right back to that as well. Do you see it now as an adult in different, there are the different perspectives to the experience? Has it grown for you?
Yes, I've got a more nuanced perspective. When I had that dusk encounter when I was about 4 years old in Corpus Christi, Texas, this you've probably heard the story, but I'll just give a quick
Yep.
um, version of it. This being manifested in my bedroom when I was a boy, and it levitated, and it was quite small. I mean, with the benefit of hindsight, I can see that it was a very small being, and it just floated there. And it began to tell me a bunch of things about myself, my future, my destiny, what I was going to be involved in, saying that I had some kind of important destiny to fulfill, etc. But I was in this kind of territorial mode. It's like, what are you doing here? This is my stuff. These are my toys. Get out of here, right? That's where my headspace was. And it just kept telling me all these things. And I mean, I wasn't having a bar of it. I went and got my mom to come look at the little being, right? And then, of course, and it told me when I threatened to go get my mom, go ahead, she won't see me, right? I remember that distinctly. And so, I went out and got my mom. She was sewing my dad's Navy uniform, not sewing, ironing rather. And then she didn't want to come back to my
Yeah.
bedroom. So I literally grabbed her by the elbow, drug her over, and flung the bedroom door open triumphantly. Of course, nothing was in there. And my mom storms off. And then I walk in, close the door behind me, and then the being shows up again.
Yeah.
Right. So when I look back at that experience, that wasn't an abduction. There was no missing time. Many people encounter beings that can convey a message of some sort, right? And that clearly was a message to me. And I can't help but tie it in with this discussion I had with Helga Morrow, who
Yeah.
was a dear friend of mine. I don't even know if she's still on this side of the veil. She and I met at a conference in Philadelphia. I was there to give a memorial speech for my late friend, Dr. Carla Turner.
Yeah.
Barbara Barthel had put together this video presentation in tribute to Carla, and I was going to give a speech and talk about the video. So, being a speaker, a presenter, they gave me my own table, and lo and behold, who was right next to me on one side? It was Preston Nichols
Yeah.
uh, and Cameron, that psychic who sat in the Montauk chair, Duncan Cameron. I can't remember his name. And on the other side were Helga and Gary Morrow. And I'm a Scorpio dragon. She's a Scorpio. We hit it off and just started talking. And then she started getting all these impressions about me, right? Because she's her whole story in itself with aliens, deep black aerospace. I mean, it just, even by our standards, it's pretty hardcore. But she said, can I tell you about some of the things I'm picking up, right? Uh, and I said, sure, go ahead. And she talked about, oh, well, one day you're going to be presenting information that'll, be worldwide in scope.
Yeah.
You'll be giving information that people all over the world will be wanting to know more about, et cetera, et cetera. And sometime after that, when I started, writing some treaties and articles and putting them out on the internet, I thought, well, this must have been what she was talking about,
Yeah.
right? Sorry, I'm still getting over this chest infection.
Oh no, mate.
Yeah, so when I laugh, sometimes it triggers like a coughing kind of. Anyway, so you know, a couple years down the track, I'd written some treaties, some articles, and gave an interview here or there, and I thought, oh, this must be what she was talking about, right? Because these articles, people can read them anywhere all over the world. No, that's not what she meant. This is what she meant, right? And it ties in exactly with what the little guy was telling me one of these days. And I it's just not in my nature to develop like an inflated ego about all
Yeah,
this. It's very easy for someone like me to stay humble,
yeah,
especially when you had to put up with a lot of the crap that people like us do, right? That helps to keep us humble.
yeah,
But as far as that nuanced perspective, right? Because I've seen all these different perspectives, the New Age perspective, the warm and fuzzy ET perspective, all the aliens are hostile from the biblical perspective. They're just demons, fallen angels, et cetera, right? And, you know, within that mix, reptilians oftentimes are left out of the mix because there's still to this day this taboo about talking about reptilians, right? Uh, I gave this discussion that there was a video that made the rounds after a recent conference, and George Knapp was in it. A few other people were in it, and they're talking about all these different ET races. And I just kept waiting and waiting, and they haven't even talked about reptilians yet. I clicked off. I watched something else, right?
oh,
Because I mean, these guys are supposed to be big shots, and maybe they did talk about reptilians later, but I just tuned out by then, so I'll have to eat crow. But
yeah,
generally, the gist of it was, okay, mantis beings, okay, Nordics, okay, Greys,
yeah,
where are the reps? This
yeah.
we reside in a reptilian sphere of influence, right?
Oh yeah,
But I have a nuanced perspective about the reps. They're not all bad.
yeah,
There are some that we call messengers. They come along once in a while, leave a cryptic message, and there are some that are actually, I don't know whether to call them allies or friendly or what, but they could even warn us sometimes about the malign intentions of bad reptilians or elements of the military working with the bad reptilians, and they'll warn people this is
yeah,
what they're trying to do to you and what have you. So it helps to be able to zoom out and
yeah,
as much as possible try to dispel any resentment or mistrust, and which is difficult to do under the best of circumstances, of course,
yeah.
but
Well,
as
I think
much as possible have a nuanced, balanced perspective. So that's how I see the ET phenomena. There are some here that are absolutely here to enslave us, to destroy us, to just take our souls and
yeah,
chip away shards of it if they can't get our whole soul. And there are others that are indifferent, benign. There's some are here just for the minerals or whatever, right? So it's a mixed bag, but there's definitely this occupying force, and I think that occupying force is made up of a number of different ET and subterranean and interdimensional races, and they're not mutually exclusive. Some
yeah,
species, civilizations are interstellar in our plane of existence, are interdimensional, and
yeah,
do live in subterranean cavern systems. They do
yeah,
all three, right? So I don't divide and you know slice and dice them like some people do, right? To me, it just question of capabilities and technological prowess, also. So, and the fact that these marauding, occupying negative aliens have, through in my view, the fundamental building block, the template for control of the surface population was the hybridization agenda, where these reptilians and some of these other beings sowed essentially their genetics into the hybrid plantation managers, the elite so called, here on the surface. This is why the elite on our planet, the Soros types, the Hillarys, are just so evil. They don't even look human. All they're
yeah,
missing is scales
yeah,
and the kind of horrid, evil things they get up to, right? And Mike Adams did a great commentary just the other day, or maybe 1 or 2 days ago now, talking about how ultimately this is, and we've known this, but it was refreshing to hear someone else with such a huge following say, "Oh, this is non-human." The
Yeah.
the the motivating driving force behind this is
Yeah.
non-human, and they want our planet, they want our resources, they don't need us. And I would, add that they'll just keep enough
Yeah.
of us around just to, do some of the slave work, to keep us around for their own sadistic pleasure, whatever that might be, right? But whoever they keep around will be so shot full of nanotech and graphene and everything else that it's questionable whether, they've even still got a soul or connection to soul at that point. But it was really refreshing to hear Mike Adams talk about that
Yeah.
this is a non-human agenda. And he's absolutely right, because if you look at how everything is played out, what the controllers have done, everything they do militates against not only human life
Yeah.
and life in general on this planet, but it militates against harmony, peace, contentment, joy, all those things. They've systematically uh, strive to take away from us,
Yeah.
right?
Absolutely.
So how could that be a human agenda only?
Yeah.
Because if they're humans that are behind that, why? I mean, I
They
don't want
can't
to.
be human. They can't be human
They
if they're
can't
behind.
be human. No,
Okay.
they can't be human if they're doing this to
Yeah.
the rest of the human race and the planet. By definition, they can't be.
That's
And so
right.
what they've done is to throw a bone to the masses and throw a bone to the UFO community. They've dipped
Oh,
their toe into these bogus faux congressional inquiries, which were just designed to go nowhere. They're a
yeah.
limited hangout. By definition, they're a limited hangout. They don't even talk about abductions,
Yeah.
right? And they're certainly not going to talk about human mutilations or cattle mutilations,
Yeah.
and they're certainly not going to, because if you open the can of worms about human abductions by aliens, eventually, if you follow the breadcrumb trail,
Yeah.
you're going to get to deep black elements of the military, aerospace, medical community
Yeah.
working with those very same aliens
Yeah.
that are abducting us,
Manifests.
right?
Oh, mate,
And
it's
they're
happening.
not going to go in that direction, because even just hinting that alien abductions are real, that undermines their whole control system. Why are we listening to you guys? You can't even protect people from
Yeah.
these aliens, right?
Well, that's what I'm saying. That's one of the things that annoys me is like you've got all the evidence and everything you need in front of you that the government is not going, there's no organization that has ever come out and told you the truth. There is enough of us to say, look, this is what happened to us. This is the proof. These are the devices we've pulled out of our bodies. We don't need the government to tell us that this stuff is real. We see them every day. All right. We see them every day. The government wouldn't have a bloody clue of half of the different species that we have encountered. Yeah, they are definitely controlled.
Like one of these experts has been showing up on a lot of podcasts lately,
Oh,
saying that he's not aware of any species over 8 feet tall. In fact, almost all of them, he says, are only about 4 or 5 feet tall. Nonsense.
no, that's
There's a number of different types of. There's reptilians, there's mantis beings, there's all kinds of beings, and in the overall multiversal scheme of things, 7, 8, 9 feet tall is not even big,
yeah, no,
because giants like in the old days, and tend to think that some of these types of giants are coming back. I mean, we're literally talking like colossus size,
yeah,
like flagpole and sequoia tree size, right?
yeah,
Because everything in the old days, paleo ancient old days,
was big.
was
Yeah,
gigantic, because like the war on carbon dioxide, it's just an
yeah,
essential
the
gas that without
oxygen
which,
different
to
level.
this day in greenhouses, they have canisters pump CO2 into the greenhouses to make things grow bigger and faster. Go
Mm,
figure. And
yeah,
yet that's supposed to be this big scary gas and net zero, all this other stuff. Well, in the old days, old days, the carbon dioxide content as well as the oxygen content was much higher on
Yeah.
this planet,
Yeah.
saturated, and that's why everything was so much bigger. Mollusk, you know, like clamshell life forms,
Yeah.
like a meter wide. Sea scorpions, like 6, 7, 8 feet, right?
Yeah.
Uh, Everything was huge in the old days.
Yeah.
Paleo ancient gigantic trees, somehow, some way, some advanced civilization came along, metaphorically with a big chainsaw, and shaved them all at the base. And
Yeah.
now we have these plateaus, buttes,
Yeah.
like
See, I've looked at those and it's like, when you look at them, it's like, okay, did a planet come along and skim it? Is there any scorch marks that's done it? These are all flat. These are just like giant chainsaw.
if you like a giant chainsaw or a laser or
Yeah.
something,
Yeah.
because it gives the game away. If we look up and we see like a mile high tree, that basically gives the game away right there,
Yeah.
right?
But when it comes into, I mean, look at all the cultures that have the tree, the tree of life, Yggdrasil, the Norse. We've got all these trees that represent something, and it's a large tree.
Yes.
So, I wouldn't be surprised in the least that, we were giants at one stage. And,
I would say so. And when I mean giants, I don't mean 10, 15, 20 feet tall. I mean mountain size.
yeah,
Some of these life forms.
yeah,
I mean gigantic.
yeah,
Because if you look at the planet that was blown up in our solar system, which is the reason why we have an asteroid belt. Some people call it Maldek, some people call it Tiamat. And I
yeah,
know people that have very clear past life memories of
yeah,
either fleeing from that planet before it was blown up, or
yeah,
being on that planet when it did blow up and dying, right? So if you have a planet so much more bigger than Earth,
yeah,
gravitationally it'll be different. There could be minerals and other things there that you won't find here, and so it wouldn't
yeah,
surprise me if some of that genetic material in the form of seeds, DNA, whatever the case may be, made its way here from being blown up and took root here, so to speak.
yeah.
Because if you look at these, like these mountains, so called, but you're not mountains.
Shapes of them.
Yeah, if you look at from the standpoint of scale and variance, you take a look at a tree stump, a regular sized tree stump, you see the gnarly root system and all that. When you look at these giant buttes and mesas, you see exactly the same thing.
Yeah,
I mean, replicated to the tiniest degree, but on a much larger scale, right?
yeah,
So, point being is that there were giant trees here, which meant that the oxygen and carbon dioxide content was much bigger, which explains in part why dinosaurs and after dinosaurs uh, uh, became extinct, well, most of them anyway, the mammals that came along eventually were huge by today's standards.
yeah,
Gigantic bears, gigantic sloths, gigantic tigers, and what have you, right? The megalodon, right? For example, in the oceans, everything was oversized, right?
yeah. But with the change of the oxygen, everything got smaller.
Smaller.
With that, you've also got the sunlight change, the vitamin C to tannin. You find tannin in, the pine trees, the pine nuts. You find it in the brain. There's all these little things that equal. We had a way richer oxygen at one stage, or it would have been amazing. It would have been absolutely amazing.
I think Tolkien and others, when
Yeah,
Tolkien talked about Middle Earth, he was talking about this place.
yeah,
But at a time in the distant past when dwarves, giants, regular sized humans, they lived in the same place at the same time for a long time, right? That was the norm for a long time. That's why it's been passed down throughout the ages of these giants. And then you get to the North American legends, and you have similar legends all over the world where there was a global war
yeah,
between giants and regular sized people, the Native Americans. Their lore of all the different tribes is replete with stories about these cannibalistic, and not really cannibals, because when they eat these little people, they're not really the same species. So I guess you can say humanoid little guys compared to them,
Yeah,
cannibalistic. Okay, I understand. But these cannibal giants were going around munching all these Native Americans. The Native Americans got sick of it. Eventually, you have to draw the line.
yeah,
It's like what we're seeing here on the surface with
yeah,
all these NGO billionaire funded revolutions and all the attendant chaos. At some point, someone has to draw a line. I mean, I'm gratified to see in Ireland, for example, and see, I can't help but see this immigrant rape invasion
yeah,
that they've perpetrated. That's the march of Sauron's army,
yeah,
because a lot of these immigrants, they come from countries where they're completely misogynistic. Consanguinity, i.e., inbreeding, is the norm, uh, where women are stoned to death for the slightest infraction. They
yeah,
make the women veiled from head to toe. And it's like, a normal 12, 13, 14, 15-year-old boy,
yeah,
when he starts getting those, hormonal urges and, oh, does she like me? Is she not? Should I kiss her? Should I? Those scumballs from other cultures, they're far beyond that. They're
yeah,
thinking about decapitation, mutilation, gang rape.
yeah,
Okay, it's just a different, not only a different consciousness, but the spirit that animates them is radically different from ours. So
yeah,
you're going to take hordes of them,
yeah,
orcs, and you're going to bring them in to a largely pacified,
yeah,
Europe and European legacy cultures like America, or like other places,
yeah,
English speaking places, or European places, largely pacified, communistic, over decades of socialism, communist, cultural Marxist, malign influence, largely disarmed, shame based, is everyone's made, especially white people, especially white German people, for example, just made to feel guilt about their whole existence, right?
yeah,
And then you bring in these hordes who are, I mean, they have a term for them. In the old days, they were cutthroats, right?
yeah,
And what's going on now? Stabbings, machetes.
yeah.
It's like, hey, would you like to come in for a cup of tea? Stab, 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 stab. These, you cannot mix
That's
those
right.
cultures with us. That's why in the old days, a characteristic of what archaeologists consider to be a settlement was it had to have walls
Yeah,
to keep the scum out, right? Otherwise, they come, they kill everyone, they rape your women, they take your women away, take your children away. That was the norm back then, and it's
yeah,
still the norm to this day
yeah,
in in North Africa, in sub-Saharan Africa, in the subcontinent, all over the place. That's the way they operate. That's how they roll.
yeah,
So the controllers say, "We'll bring in all these orcs from all over the place, Latin America. Come on up, right?" And you look in Latin America and the tradition of depravity in those places. I mean, long before the Aztecs and the Mayans, that kind of depravity was going on. So what do
yeah,
we see in America? We see all these, Salvadorans and Venezuelans and MS-13. What are they doing? They're going around killing and raping. And that's what they do. So Sauron's army's on the march, but I'm heartened by the fact that the Irish, and leave it to the mix, that they've drawn a line in the sand. They said
yeah,
enough is enough,
yeah,
right? Because see, it's gotten to the point where people in the UK were more afraid of getting arrested by the authorities for
yeah,
complaining than they were about getting decapitated, right?
yeah,
You should be more worried about getting decapitated and stabbed to death. And why is it that only the natives are made to feel unsafe?
yeah,
They should have home field advantage. They should, hey, I know every square pebble in this neighborhood. Don't come around here and try to intimidate me, boy, right?
yeah,
Because
yeah.
I grew up around here. Why
There's,
should the natives be the only ones made to feel unsafe, right?
yeah,
So
yeah,
that never made sense to me. But then again, they're a disarmed population. But you know
yeah.
what? Cricket bats, baseball
Oh, look,
bats,
when
we
it
can
comes
play
to
at that
survival,
game,
you'll
right?
grab whatever's, survival, you'll grab whatever's available.
Well, you did. I'll give you an example of how pacified these people are. There's a video taken by the victims. It was like a veranda terrace
Yeah.
patio
Yeah.
up on the second floor. A Middle Eastern jihadist was climbing up this ladder with a dagger, and these stupid Swedes are just filming the guy. Now,
Oh,
and eventually he made it to the top and he started wielding his dagger. You might have seen the video. Point
no.
being is, in the old days, it would be like, oh, the barbarians are at the gates. Honey, get the pot of tar boiling,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Defend. Defend.
Defend, drop a potted plant, drop a bowling ball, you know.
Yeah. No,
That's
people
what
have
they
become
did in the
quite
old days,
pacified, haven't they? Yeah.
but the people have been so pacified.
Yeah.
So you're bringing hordes of orcs
Yeah.
into a largely pacified, shame-based society culture, right? That's been riven by war. Let's not forget that the white peoples of Europe have been made to slaughter each other unmercifully for centuries. I mean, you don't even have to go back far. I mean, just look at World War I, the
Yeah.
mass slaughter in the trenches, right? And then before that, the 30 Years' War, the 100 Years' War, this goes on and on. I mean, how many more people would be in Europe if World War I hadn't happened and
Yeah.
the mass slaughter? And then a mere 20 years later, they started up again with
Uh,
another.
it's this is a repeat pattern. They've got to do it. This is the way they keep the populations down. You know how it goes. I mean, I look at it as silent war. They've got every base covered. They've got the air covered. They've got the food poisoned. They've got the soil poisoned.
Very scientific. It is.
Every single aspect of our humanity, right down to our senses. Our senses have been
Muted,
mimicked.
radically muted.
Yeah, yeah. People can't, they're going to go back to a stage where they can't write their own names.
We're already seeing that because there was a woman, and she's not unusual. She decided to sue the university she attended because she's illiterate. But there's a vast number of people in America, just to cite but one example, but particularly acute in America because the Rockefeller types have asserted control, long since asserted control over the school system over there. So it's a Rockefeller school system. So the people are extremely dumbed down and be made to be malcontents, made to be
Yeah,
angry, made to be socialist, right?
yeah,
And they exploit the differences in cultures and in races in America, and they've just weaponized certain cultures to just create so chaos and upheaval, right? At a time when we should all be pulling the oars in the same direction,
yeah,
pulling on the same length of rope.
yeah,
What they've managed to do is just create all this disharmony and chaos and infighting, right? But the problem is, certain, I mean, let's call a spade, that certain ethnicities, certain cultures are just less intelligent than other ones.
yeah,
And some of them are given over to their base primordial impulses. And so if you can manipulate them through their music, if you can manipulate them through media, social engineering, Hollywood, and then you can have all these communist hordes of academics and teachers telling them that they're oppressed, that it's
yeah,
Whitey's fault, and you got to get back at Whitey, you got to kill them, and it's perfectly okay. So they, as you know, they created this two-tier policing system. So you have all these thugs and hoods and villains going around killing with impunity, right?
yeah,
So and finally, it's got to come to this where in the open now you're having these outbreaks of chaos and rioting and what have you. So at some point, people are going to have to draw the line, and then on top of all that, of course, they go and they bomb Iran, which is just
yeah,
another stunt to pull the U.S. Into another war they're going to lose. And then hopefully, because the way that the controllers, hybrid plantation managers of this planet work, they want it to go nuclear. They
oh
want
yeah,
to irradiate the planet. They
yeah,
don't want clean air. See, other beings can exist quite happily in a highly irradiated environment. Not so much for people like us or beings like us,
Yeah.
but for other beings, it's not a problem. I mean, look at all the reports of people having these close encounters with alien craft, and they wind up getting radiation poisoning,
Yeah.
right? So, I mean, they fly around in these things, and they don't seem to be bothered by the radioactive emissions. But we get around that, and then we get sick, and our hair falls out. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? So,
Yeah.
I mean,
Like,
that's another factor that the powers that be. Also, it gets back to what I was talking about with the Buffy the Vampire Slayer of all the slayings and the loosh feedings and the bringing in and all these forces as a result. In some of these, let's say, religious traditions on this planet, one of the Messiah or Messiah type entities they want to bring back
mm,
as a prerequisite to bringing back this Messiah type figure, they need world wars, nuclear wars,
yeah.
all this stuff. I mean,
Yeah.
they're openly saying this is what we need,
Yeah.
and in order to bring the Messiah back, right? And that makes me wonder what kind of Messiah it is if it
Needs
requires all this bloodshed on a
it needs to
planetary
be like
scale.
that.
You know what I
Yeah.
mean? But see, that ties into what we talked about with
John.
Buffy and the graduation day, and I mean, there were really dropping some truth bombs there with some of those episodes. But
Yeah.
I'm rambling. I know you got some more
No,
questions, and
no, and I enjoy it. I enjoy just, this is what it's about. It's about hanging out and having a realistic conversation. Doesn't matter where it goes. Okay. No, with all of this, AI. Now I'm watching AI evolve, and back in the day, I was 10 years old and I had these experiences with stuff in space, and I believed that AI was in space. It was blown out into space to protect it from us. And it's a repeated pattern. It gets